Hello there, everyone. I am your host, the Sea Monster, and I welcome you all to part 2 of my essay video series on Godzilla vs. Kong. To recap, back in part 1, we covered the film's story and character work. So now, for this part, we are going to discuss the world building that this film brings into the overall MonsterVerse, as well as address some questions that anyone might have about certain aspects of such world building. So, with that said, let's dive right in. So I figure that a good place to start would be the question of where all the other titans are, as in the ones such as Rodan, Behemoth, Scylla, Methuselah, and such that were introduced back in Godzilla King of the Monsters. A fellow YouTuber out there who covers Godzilla content like I do, named C. Animus, in his series called Godzilla vs. Kong, A Great Sadness, where he critiques the film in a negative light, went on to criticize the film for seeming to have brushed away the titans that we saw back in King of the Monsters, when they are shown during the film's opening credits sequence to be labeled as defeated. This is all set up in the style of a tournament, much like something at a UFC, leading up to the big culminating match between Godzilla and Kong. Now sure, one could go under the assumption that Rodan and other titans may be dead now, especially considering that when we see a recap on both Godzilla and Kong's previous battles, we are shown the female Muto back in the 2014 film, Ramarak, the big skull crawler at the end of Kong's Skull Island, and Ghidorah, back in King of the Monsters, as examples of titans which have all been killed, hence being labeled as defeated. However, not only is there no indication or mention of Rodan or Behemoth or any other titans having been killed by Godzilla in Godzilla vs. Kong, but let's also keep in mind that Rodan and those other titans in King of the Monsters submitted to Godzilla by the end of that film, and during the end credits of that film, there are hints to suggest that they went away peacefully to either improve the planet ecologically or to find a new place to rest in. Since those titans were only a threat to the world due to being under the control of Ghidorah, we aren't left with much reason for Godzilla to need to kill any of them once the three-headed invader was, as one would say, defeated. Meanwhile, we have Kong, who, once Godzilla has him down for the count, is being forced to submit only to respond with defiance and be left to die. Granted, just because there isn't evidence to suggest that titans such as Rodan and company were killed, that may not necessarily mean that there's no evidence to suggest that they were not killed off-screen. For now, though, at least as of this essay video series, I recommend not jumping to such a conclusion as that the likes of Rodan and other titans being killed off-screen, but rather I recommend some consideration that the defeated label being used for certain titans has more than one meaning in this case, with some being defeated as a result of death, and some as a result of submission. Anyway, let's move right along and go into another aspect of the film's world building, the Hollow Earth. Now, there are people out there who have stated that the way the film introduces the Hollow Earth in its full glory was, in one of its critics' words, is just too far of a leap. I understand that the Hollow Earth is something that can never happen in real life. In fact, it's been proven that it doesn't even exist. But here's another thing to consider. There have been scientists out there that have proven that giant monsters such as Godzilla and Kong and other such things can't physically exist in the real world either, due to their mass alone making it impossible for them to even so much as move. However, if that, as a scientific fact, can't be ignored, then there would be no point in making a giant monster movie. Now would there? Much like how changing the dinosaurs in the Jurassic Park films to suddenly have feathers just to make them more scientifically accurate to what's been known about dinosaurs today would miss the point that those dinosaurs were created after a hole in their genetic coding was filled in with frog DNA, ergo making the dinosaurs scientifically inaccurate by design. Anyway, back to the Hollow Earth. So yes, the Hollow Earth doesn't exist in the real world. It's been proven to be the case centuries ago. However, this movie is set in a cinematic universe where a Hollow Earth has been established to be a real thing. A thing that, granted, only a certain niche group of characters believe exists, but a thing that exists nonetheless. In fact, it's been set up in previous entries in the MonsterVerse already. Sure, Godzilla 2014 didn't mention anything about the Hollow Earth or set it up, but that movie not only was made with a more grounded approach in mind, but it was also made before Warner Brothers and Legendary Pictures were even able to get the rights to Kong for any future films. Not to mention, while the film didn't plant any seeds of setup for the Hollow Earth to be a thing, that doesn't mean that it set things up that would contradict it either. So at that point, the rest of a potential series could go anywhere because Godzilla 2014 was the first film in a series that could easily be a one-off, or it could lead into a string of follow-ups with a blank check. Kong Skull Island and King of the Monsters, however, did make mention of the Hollow Earth and set it up to be further explored later down the line. So Godzilla vs. Kong is the logical culmination of that setup. It would be one thing if the Hollow Earth was introduced in this movie without any mention or setup in any of the previous 3 MonsterVerse films, much like, as I mentioned previously back in part 1, how Palpatine was brought back in Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker without any of the prior 2 films in the sequel trilogy so much as even hinting at his return, because then we would have a problem. However, the Hollow Earth was established to be a potential thing to exist in Kong Skull Island and was teased and even given a brief look at in King of the Monsters via the tunnel system. So GVK finally introducing the Hollow Earth proper is part of the natural progression of this series of films. Regardless of the nature of an entire ecosystem set beneath the Earth's surface with an unusual form of gravity and structure in the environment, saying that the existence of such an ecosystem conceptually is too much of a leap isn't enough of a valid criticism. Sorry, Jeremy Johns. What matters is how it being established in this series was executed. And based on the fact that we've had at least a couple films to establish it as a thing prior to GVK, the execution is, at the very least, solid. The Hollow Earth's ecosystem is presented in a very fascinating way, and I say that in a positive light, where it really does come off as a primitive world as if the prehistoric era, such as the age of the dinosaurs, never really ended with a surreal yet somewhat logistically sound look of an inverted environment. That also has its own form of gravity. It shows a world that has many dangers, such as the warbats, the hellhawks, and other such predators, some of which even hold similar physical traits as certain titans, like the one lizard that somewhat resembles a quadrupedal Godzilla-like creature, but also gives off a strong sense of awe and wonder, and with such rich layers of lore, such as the zero-gravity ring of rocks that Kong leaps through to get from one side of the Hollow Earth to another, where he discovers a stone carving of a hand akin to a species. The way the ecosystem is presented, even in just a few minutes of film, very much supports Nathan Lynn's statement of how Skull Island was like if the Hollow Earth came to the surface. It is also presented in a way where enough is shown to where a lot of potential for future exploration and future entries in the MonsterVerse is properly showcased without being too overbearing or trying too hard to set up such future entries. There is also a strong sense of how Kong's species had reached a point of some form of civilization based on how the throne room and all the various weapons, such as the battle axe Kong acquires, as well as how the species relied on the energy in the Earth's core in order to empower their weapons. It adds to the humanization of Kong and his species, which also adds to the parallel between Kong and mankind, as I previously mentioned in part 1. That being said, it's certainly pretty convenient for the throne of which Kong's species once resided to be right underneath Hong Kong, where Godzilla goes to track down the Ghidorah head that is being used by Apex to operate Mechagodzilla. Let alone the exact spot in Hong Kong where Godzilla ends up shooting his atomic breath into the ground and towards the Hollow Earth once Kong sets his axe down for it to be recharged through the Earth's core with the Hollow Earth energy that goes on within it. Not to say that it can't happen, but it definitely does come off as a 1 in a million sort of scenario for all these things to line up so exactly. It's also pretty interesting to see that mankind has developed its technology to such a degree where a company like Apex had developed the Heaves, Hollow Earth aerial vehicles that have such a futuristic look to them, especially within the span of a decade between 2014 and when GVK takes place, which was 5 years after King of the Monsters. So we could estimate the present year at that point to be 2024. Now sure, certain new discoveries and or certain circumstances can lead to a rush in scientific and technological advancements, such as how the Cold War and the space race resulted in the United States to quickly make advancements in space travel in order for the lunar landing of 1969 to occur and to be accomplished. But, in the case of GVK, some of the technological advancements as shown in that film seem to be not so much unbelievable or impossible, but rather a bit of a stretch, even with the discoveries of things such as Titans or the Hollow Earth, which would certainly forever affect mankind's understanding of the world. On a side note, realistically speaking, I'm pretty sure that we will not be seeing flying cars going around or something like a large hologram of a gorgeous woman being projected across a city by the year 2049. So my point is that the world building could have been done a little differently. I mean, sure, it's really cool to see something like a Heave flying around Hong Kong and dodging all the monster mayhem going on there, despite the fact that there wasn't a whole lot of setup for Nathan Lin to have training of any sort that would involve him pulling off those kinds of maneuvers. But I do think that certain things could have been done a little differently when it comes to setting up a way for mankind to get access to the Hollow Earth without much trouble in the future. There is also the aspect of the Hollow Earth tunnels and how they're implemented into the film as a quick way for Bernie, Madison, and Josh to get from America to Hong Kong, so that they can go on to discover Mechagodzilla. While the film does make use of the tunnel system that was previously established in Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019, it still comes off as such a huge leap in this case when it comes to technological advancements that's far greater than even our most advanced tech of today. Apex uses fields of anti-gravity in order to achieve this, much like with the Heaves. Now granted, we can come to a conclusion that Apex Cybernetics is all about technological advancements and are very far ahead of the curve to where they could be able to do something like this. And there is the prospect of how Walter Simmons is aware of the existence of the Hollow Earth and is very much invested in achieving a means to get people there. However, there hasn't been established how long this company has been around in the timeline of the MonsterVerse, and if we were to go by the entries that are set in present time, or at least closer to around there, which as I mentioned earlier, that timeline stems from 2014 to 2024, let's just say that 10 years is a bit of a stretch when it comes to achieving technological ingenuity of this magnitude. Perhaps there could have been some sort of happy medium, where we still get technology that give off a sense of anti-gravity at play, but to a limited degree while also maintaining the high-speed travel that we see on display in this film, that also manages to make use of the tunnel system that we've seen established since King of the Monsters. As it is, though, it's not to say that this breaks the film overall, but a good lesson is to be learned here, in that sometimes it'd be better to take small steps rather than make giant leaps in order to have certain payoffs. So I think that this is a pretty good place to put the brakes on this series, at least for this part. We've covered quite a bit of the film already, from its story to its characters to the world building that it brings in. But for now, stay tuned for part 3 where we will look at the technical side of things in Godzilla vs. Kong. Thank you for watching, and until the next part of this series, I will see you all later.